I got here in 1986, which is the year that Newswatch started. The first Newswatch was in July, and John Ryan, the emeritus journalism professor, actually was a news director that summer, and I came on board in August. And so it started in 86 and ran through 97.
Who was news director after you?
After me, I think you'd have to go back and ask Kelly, etc. There was a sequence of other people, but I don't remember the order.
But then Kelly became like the first consistent one for.
Really, really. I mean,
Uh-huh.
Kelly was. John Eisenhower filled that slot for a while. I think they had some other folks, maybe part time, but John Eisenhower filled in and handled it, I believe. I'm not sure of that.
Yeah.
Better if you check the books. But Kelly really, things began to change drastically when Kelly got on board. She really made this station what it is today. She really did in the operation.
What's your other broadcast background?
Actually, I've got both print and broadcast experience
Right.
and advertising. And truthfully, my television experience was very limited. I was a newspaper reporter and editor and part owner of an advertising agency in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And that was really my exposure with television, is that we used to produce things through WEIU-TV television in Marquette, Michigan. And then we would use that for our clients and was aired in other places. I didn't have a lot of television experience. My experience was in broadcast, both public and network radio, and loved that work. And when they asked me to take over the news directorship here, when I came on board as a tenured faculty member, as a tenured track faculty member, I told them I don't have television experience. I had previously been the city editor of the Tribune-Star in Terre Haute, most recently before taking this job, and had a lot of National Public Radio and had produced for them experience. But television was a new venture, many things to learn. But the basics were, if you know journalism and good journalism, and if you understand the principles of broadcast, you can do it. That's the big thing.
How did you initially get involved with Newswatch? And I also heard, I've also found out that, I think it was originally called Newscan, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. It was called Newscan. Actually, when I got here in July, they'd had maybe one newscast at that point in time. If you walked into the newsroom at that point in time, we had typewriters. We had them set up on tables like you'd find if you're going to a church banquet hall. We had a teletype with the Associated Press, I believe it was. I don't think it was UPI. That was United Press International. I think we just had the one news service, and the Illinois News Network. And we started by doing both radio news and television news, and used to use the radio news as a prep for those who were going to go into television news. So students would usually do like a noontime news show, and then some of them would stay on and would do the evening newscast on Newscan. We had a $500 budget to put together some sort of television set, news set. And thanks to the guys over in the central, they were carpenters, the carpenters that worked for the university. They took that $500 and managed to put together a news set, which was something short of a miracle. It was a lot of, it looked pretty decent. I'm sure there's old video you can pick up of that. But we had very little money, no individual budget for the news and public affairs operation, which I was not really pleased about. But we made it through.
What kind of programming did WEIU kind of air in its early days? I mean, prior to the affiliation and everything.
Well, the programming, 86 through
92.
the years I was, through 92.
92.
What would happen is, we had local programming, and a lot of those local productions actually went on past 92. And also what would happen is that the programming director would purchase programming through the funding that we had through CPB. Well, wait a minute, we didn't have CPB at that time. I don't know exactly what the funding resource was. Well, no, I take it back. We did have CPB funding. And they would purchase the programming and then air it. So there was a big fuss back then that they did not want duplication with WILL out of Champaign-Urbana. But the truth was we were operating pretty much on the local cable system, and it was something that could be done rather than being affiliated, a PBS affiliate, et cetera, which we now I think is it 25%, I believe the affiliation is. So it worked out. It was some good programming decisions. The concept was to service the local area, and I did a good job of that.
What were the goals originally for Newscan / News Watch? Like, what did it initially cover? The EIU itself, the community surrounding it, or beyond?
Yes, you have to recall that we had, as we started, we had one van, which many of the student journalists referred to as the death van because it sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. And we covered as much within our coverage range, which was several counties, as we possibly could, and that we could get our students to. They did remarkable work with what they had. I'm sure Kelly can tell you about the first airplane crash she covered, which was between here and Mill Creek. And we had, during presidential election years and senatorial election years, we had, a lot of different dignitaries that would come through. Emphasized making phone calls to all the area police and fire networks, etc. Kept our eyes on the legislature and used other kinds of things. So it was really about training. The goal was to train these young men and women to become good journalists. And as you'll see by looking at the list of alumni and the positions they've held and continue to hold, I think we did a really good job of that. Yeah, it was a different operation than other student journalism operations. I was a journalism faculty member, and the objective in the Daily Eastern News, for example, was that the news director or advisor, academic advisor, was not to have their hands in the mix. That was not possible with television or radio because of the FCC licensing. So the truth of the matter is that while they, kind of pitched things by me, and I did what you did, copy editing, and but in a suggestion way, not in a corrective way, but to say, you need to go back and look at this. Perhaps you'd want to ask another person about that. It was always my intention to force the student journalists back into the field until the job got done the way I knew it had to be done. And so I did not really make the decisions. I did not make the news decisions. They did. Sometimes they were right, sometimes they were wrong, but most of the time they did a pretty darn good job.
How many students worked on the program, at least like initially, I guess kind of maybe moving forward even? Did it like grow at all? Or?
It really grew back when Janice Collins took my position within the journalism faculty, and Kelly was hired as news director. And once that happened, and there was more of a recruitment, and the word got out about what WEIU-TV was doing, and the Emmys started coming in, etc., it began to be its own best advertisement. I couldn't tell you numbers. Numbers was not my focus, but because I was getting students coming in out of classes. I taught a couple of broadcast journalism classes, one a semester, and then also had the students from the classes assigned to work here. There was a very dark divide, clear divide, I should say, between the print journalism portion of the program here and the broadcast. And I don't think it's a secret to anybody that the broadcast students were not held in the same esteem as the print students. Well, as someone who worked in both print, in fact, most of my life in print, and later into broadcast, that did not make sense to me. What made sense to me was that this was the future. This, combined with print, and then moving into digital, that was the way the world was going to go. And in fact, we were able to start a relationship using the Journal-Gazette-Times Courier at that time, some of their staff, to take part in our news operation. So it gave local print journalists an opportunity to participate and have exposure to television news, and it gave our students an opportunity to work with the print journalists. And that was the way I saw the future coming. And quite frankly, that's sort of the way it's evolved.
What kind of equipment did the station use in the early years?
The Death Van. We had, was it 2 1/4 inch tape? There was no digital editing, obviously. Nothing was digitized. Couple of cameras, the studio cameras. Not much. You know, by today's standards, you couldn't. It's just been a massive leap forward. One of the decisions I made as News and Public Affairs Director was I had to make a choice between whether I was going to learn every piece of new equipment or whether I was going to focus on the journalism aspect and make sure that we got someone hired that knew about the production equipment. And we went through a cycle of several people, and those decisions were totally left to the technologically inclined and those with experience in that field. And that was an important decision. There's no way you can keep up. You're going to have a staff that can handle all of that. And then as the software became more involved, you know, that's just another dynamic. By that time, I was long gone.
Were there any memorable newscasts in those early years? Any big stories or anything like that?
There were big stories, yes. The Superfund over in Marshall, Illinois, where we had a lot of an environmental hazard, and the EPA Superfund came in and did that work. That was a very big story. One of the most trying stories had to do with well, there were two, young radiators closing was one, and there was a lot of environmental damage done there. We also had a sewing machine, almost like I'd call it a sweatshop, that was in operation. And I can remember sending Rick Stuckey, who is now, and has for some time worked in Chicago media, and works for Comcast at present time up in Chicago, being sent over with a camera, and students were told, you know, stay on the public sidewalk, etc. Anyway, his tape got seized by the owners of the operation, who later we found had some rather shady ties. That was a battle. We got the tape back. It involved the vice president of the university at that time, and provost. It involved, as I recall, we also had to speak with the station manager here, or the general manager was not too happy about that one. Nor was some of the community that said, you know, this guy's going to go away, and he's, you know, this provides jobs. Well, the place did close, and quite frankly, I'm pretty proud of that. I'm pretty proud of what those students did, and I'm pretty proud that the students had the guts to stand up and do what they had to do. And the vice president of the university stood by us as well. So that was a big one. There were ongoing stories of that nature. We've had murders and, you know, the usual run of what happens in news. So yeah, I'd say we had our share.
Was there ever like any news story that was large enough to actually like it was so huge it actually like interrupted the scripted newscast, or any time an urgent bulletin? I don't know, maybe
Well, we did not have breaking news as you have it today. This was that would have been a really they would have had to set off a bomb in downtown Charleston. I do think there was one time that we had someone during a newscast. Um, there was a gas station just up across from it's now Inyart's place, and a lift, as I recall, fell on someone, and someone was killed. And there was somebody that went up and got the story and brought it in, but we did not have the resources that we have today to do any of those kinds of things.
Yeah, you probably never got like overridden by like any emergency stuff, or maybe I don't know.
No, there was nothing that of that nature that I recall that occurred. May have happened after my watch, but not during my time.
Do you keep in touch with like the students you work with at Newswatch?
Yes, I sure do. I'm in touch with a great many of them, and Facebook has been a charm as far as that's concerned. And I'm always quite struck by how well so many of them have done. And even those that didn't go on into television news careers, that went into other areas, they've also done quite well in their other chosen professions. And they're pretty amazing young people. They really were. And have turned into pretty phenomenal men and women in our communities across the country.
What kind of changes did you make when you were in charge here, and like what other things did you oversee, like at WEIU and just the university in general?
Well, the whole news operation was something that was a work in progress, and all the time I was active here. The news operation consumed a tremendous amount of time working on grants, working with the public as far as our public affairs programming. I think it's far superior today to what we cobbled together back in those days. The other work I did at the university, obviously I rose to tenure track faculty person and finally got tenure. And when I felt that I had done all I could do here, and I felt that I had the resources to do, I asked to be taken out of the operation. That was in '97, and I became director of distance learning for the School of Adult and Continuing Education. And after doing that for a year, I recommended to them that they didn't need a director of distance learning and continuing ed, and felt that they really needed to have an overall director of distance learning, etc. So I was still teaching. I had a little bit different load, and then I went on to be very active at the local and the national level of the University Professionals of Illinois. So I did that the rest of my career, along with teaching one course a semester, 12 months a year.
How did WEIU end up like becoming a member of PBS? Was there any sort of special transition? Like, how did it affect WEIU as a station?
I have to tell you, I really don't have a clear memory of that. From my perspective, we were just doing the news. I wasn't in that level of the making the changes. That was a station management. Ken Bino, former station manager, and John Beabout, who was at that time the general manager. Those decisions were made there, and with university fiscal and academic officers.
What did the surrounding community think of Newswatch/Newscan? Were they thrilled by the fact that more local news stories were being covered? What did they think of the on-air talent?
I mean, you'd walk down the street and get feedback, but nothing that I could say, gee, on such and such a day, Newswatch carried the day. I believe that probably one of the most watched newscasts were the specials that we did on election nights, local election specials. But I think all of that has changed over the years, and I think that the Heartland Highways and some of the programs that were done there, not Newswatch itself, But the colloquium program, the EIU connection programs, the sports programming, I think all of those were probably much more better watched, shall we say, by the local audiences. But I never had a good read on that. That was not something that my job, as I saw it, was that we had to produce the best news product with the students as possible, and my real objective was to give these students the opportunity to learn how to be good journalists, ethically based journalists.
Did you or any of the staff at Newswatch ever run into any like notable ethical issues? Well, I think maybe that one was also, but I mean, how did you take care? Like, I mean, if there are any others, what did you do, and how did the rest of the station take care of it and all that? Did you or anybody else at Newswatch ever have any ethical issues? I mean, I think you mentioned that one earlier, but if you did, I mean, how did you and the rest of the station handle that?
Well, I handled the politicking portion of that with the general manager and with any other university officials. My role, as far as I was concerned, was that the students had to be free to report the news as they perceived it should be reported. And my job as a news director was to make darn sure that management didn't get in the way.
Would you have any gauge on what you think the student body thought of Newswatch? Or, I mean, did it end up inspiring anybody to actually join the show?
I'm sure that what happened is that students, their friends suddenly said, wow, I'd like to do, and in fact, I know of some instances where friends would say, I'd like to do that. And we'd say, hey, it's open to everybody. You don't have to be a journalism major. I will tell you one story, though, about that I think is important. And that's many years after I'd left being the news director for WEIU. I was in Chicago. I was doing a press conference in my role as statewide president of University Professionals of Illinois. And I was doing the press conference with Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky and many others. And again, it was a problem with funding that was coming up. There were being cuts in a variety of areas. And this particular news conference, they were bringing people up in wheelchairs and who had serious health, mental health, etc. Issues. And I had to get up and speak about higher education and the importance of the funding issues for higher ed. And I thought, how am I going to do this when there are obviously all these people in such need? And this was national cameras. This wasn't just, this wasn't WEIU or WCIA. So I looked up, and as I was looking at the stage trying to figure this out, I saw this young woman roll a guy in a wheelchair up the ramp to the stage. And I looked and I realized that this young woman was a woman with a disability who had been a student here and who actually worked on NewsScan. And I went, aha, this is what it's about. Here is why you never know where this is going to pay off in the end. This young woman is being the voice of this man who cannot speak well enough to be understood. And because of the poise and the balance she learned at WEIU, she was able to do that job. And I was never prouder of those students than I was that day.
So you probably wouldn't know anything about like how the EIU's administration got along with the station or Newswatch/NewsScan.
By and large, they were extraordinarily supportive. I know that it was Dan Marvin, early president of Eastern, who really fought to get this to happen. I know that President Reeves was very, very supportive. I know that by and large, the other presidents that followed were supportive. I think that it generally had good support. It really did.
Would you know if any news anchors or other professional journalists have ever gotten the chance to see Newswatch, and if they did?
Yes, it did.
how did they evaluate like everything?
That was a regular part of our operation. I belong to the Illinois News Broadcasters Association. I belong to the Radio Television News Directors Association. We had student chapters of both of those organizations. We saw to it that students went to the state and the national conferences where they competed for awards, etc., and they did very well with that. And news directors across the country that I worked with were extraordinarily impressed with what we were doing here. The best station in the state at that time for student news operations was Southern. Ken Keller was the faculty news director down there. Ken was really helpful, very supportive. We had great support from across the state with the broadcasting associations. And, WEIU, the students here always carried the day for us. They really did.
How would you compare News Scan / News Watch to kind of the other newscasts that college students and other public television stations would put out? And News Watch ever put anything out that like maybe kind of rivaled that of like a local or local commercial or national newscast? I don't know.
In recent years, under Kelly's direction, I would say that you've come very close to that, if not met it. And I think under Janice Collins' direction as well, the student news broadcasts varied as to how much everybody had in resources. I mean, a Columbia School of Journalism, okay, they have a lot more resources. You have some newscasts where you actually have the station with Orlando, Florida is one, Tampa. There are others that have far more resources for people to work with. So you can't really compare things that way. It just isn't a fair comparison. But I think that the product that's come out in, say, the past 10 years has just been quite amazing.
What else would you say about like WEIU and what are your thoughts in general just on News Watch and News Scan, its relation to the university and the journalism department?
I think it was extraordinarily important to both and for both. I think it had an impact on the journalism department eventually, that people began to open up more to come out of the print shell, and that was no small feat. I think the university early on, President Dan Marvin recognized that this was a very, very good PR vehicle for the university. And they knew they had a very strong daily student news media in the print format. But Marvin, I think, had a glimmer of what was coming in the future. And I have to give a lot of kudos to him for seeing to it that we had the station come into operation, and to those who really backed the idea of a student news operation.
You kind of talked about there might have been a time where there was some tension between kind of the print and the broadcast students, or what was the relationship kind of between those?
I did not enjoy equal treatment as a broadcasting faculty member with the print faculty. There was a clear preference that was made towards print. And if you weren't the print person, even though you were assigned to be the broadcast person, the interactions were just not quite the same. I too, when I was a print journalist, we had a little bit of elitism as print journalists about the broadcast industry, But as I worked in broadcast over the years, I began to see that not only did both have major roles, but that they also could and would eventually complement each other. The problem with broadcast, and things that everybody points out, is that it's more about how you look or how you sound as opposed to what you're producing. And there was always tension with that, and justifiably so. However, the other important thing is that the writing style is different. The rules of writing are somewhat different. The relationship of the audience to the writer, reporter, producer is different. And then as we began to get the digital age coming in, that began to really change things. So to me, it was always about not choosing either or. What I saw and envisioned was that we needed to look at this whole news operation idea as and print and digital and broadcast and whatever else might be coming that we don't even know about yet. Computers were first installed in the newsroom at Eastern after I got here in '86. I think maybe '87 or '88. And all of that happened so quickly that people had to adjust emotionally, and they had to adjust their perceptions of what worked, what didn't work, and that's been a real big hurdle. I think we're probably over it now, or through it. I'd like to think that what I did, what the students here did, helped in that. It's just what it is. It's history.
I think you might have touched on this a little bit earlier, but do you have anything more on the relationship like WEIU had with WEIU-FM/WELH? And yeah, I think they shared a bit of resources, didn't they?
WEIU-FM and WEIU-TV. WEIU-FM is the radio, and we did radio newscasts only. During the day, I think students came in early in the morning. We did a noon news hour, and then we produced some special shows and some talk shows, etc. And then, separate from that, but feeding into it, using the news materials that we were producing for radio, we then fed that into the evening television news operation.
How'd you keep busy in the summer when Newswatch was on hiatus? And were there any times when WEIU itself had its operations interrupted, compromise suspended by something? I actually heard there was a fire back in '96 at Buzzard.
I don't recall that, but it could have happened. There was, we had a, it wasn't a fire, we had a lot of reconstruction here. I mean, the Buzzard building, everything was, this building was totally renovated. And I don't remember too much about that either. We worked through it, whatever it was. Master Control was open for a while, and then the studios were totally redone. I couldn't tell you what year that was. We just lived through it, we really did. We were based, can't remember if we were based in the gym for a while or just exactly how that all worked out.
What did you do over the summer when Newswatch was on hiatus?
Well, I was teaching, still working through the other productions, and of course students were involved in those other productions. So it seems to me some years we had a news operation and some years we didn't, but I can't really recall how that all flowed together.
Has it always been the same time slot?
No, that's moved around quite a bit, and again, I don't remember what those changes were.
So you wouldn't know if it was shorter or longer? Or?
I don't think we ever did more than a half hour, except for special shows, special reports, the election night things. I do remember that when the Iran hostages were taken, we went to live operation, and gathered all the students in and worked from the teletypes in whatever areas we could and did a on air. That was that was probably the closest to breaking news that we ever did.
Are you sure it was Iran? That was like 79, I think. The hostage, or was it another hostage crisis somewhere else?
Why did I think it was hostage? You're right. It's not. It's not the hostage.
Or you mean the Gulf, the first Gulf War?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was thinking of Iran for another reason, but that's
Oh,
okay.
'cause
Yeah,
I
the
mean,
first
Iraq.
Gulf War. Yeah, that's right.
Iraq,
Yeah.
Iran.
Yes,
I
thank you.
don't blame you at all.
Begins to all meld together after a point in time.
How would you compare the quality of the newscasts you looked over the ones Kelly, Janice, or any of your successors looked over?
How would I compare them?
Or like, how would you like compare? Or like, I mean, like, kind of, just in general. I mean,
Oh, they're far superior. Absolutely far superior. I mean, here we have a situation where you've got someone like Kelly who got her basic training here and went on to work in commercial television, was a news anchor, was a producer, and came back and remembered what it was like to work here and knew what the importance of that operation was, and then actually did the job. It doesn't get better than that. It doesn't get better than that, and that's the greatest reward a teacher has.
how many of like your former students have gone on to kind of take roles like that?
I don't keep count, but it's a lot of them. It's a lot, and they had very good positions, and many of them still do. Some of them have now gone on to get out of the business, but they're still using those skills.
When I was in high school, I very much enjoyed public speaking and I enjoyed theater. And I would enjoy getting up and giving presentations in class, whether it be by myself or with a group. And I also participated in several plays throughout my high school years. When I graduated high school, I was very unsure exactly what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go to school. But I had a friend, and my friend and her mother were traveling to Eastern Illinois University to check out the campus. And they asked me if I'd like to tag along, and I said, sure. So I went with them to check out the campus. I really enjoyed the university, the campus life, the campus experience, and I applied to Eastern and got accepted and chose to attend Eastern Illinois University. My first semester as a freshman, I had an introduction to radio television, essentially. It was the evolution of radio TV, how it started, and my instructor in that course was the FM station manager, and I thought, FM station manager? I didn't even realize there was a radio station on campus. And his name was Jerry Weaver, and he always encouraged the class to participate in some sort of extracurricular journalism activity, whether it be the newspaper, yearbook, or join the radio TV station. And it just really piqued my interest, and it also, the more and more he talked about it in class, I was energized and excited and encouraged to come over and check out the facility, and I'm sure glad I did, because that was really the catapult that got me involved in working in a TV facility and also deciding on becoming a journalism major at Eastern.
When did you actually get started working at WEIU, and did you like work at the newspaper, or the radio station newspaper anywhere else in the journalism department?
I actually worked in both the radio station, the television station, and also the Daily Eastern News. As a student in journalism at Eastern Illinois University, you took not only print-driven courses, but also broadcasting courses. And because of those two different platforms, we were required to write so many stories for the Daily Eastern News, and we were required to spend some time at the television station. So I really, thankfully, had the ability to work in all different mediums. I just happened to choose television. It just seemed to make me the most excited and happy to work there, and I was really intrigued by the equipment and the technology and just the platform itself.
When did you get started at WEIU-TV itself, and what were the things you started out doing?
I started as a freshman, at Eastern Illinois University. I'll never forget the day that I worked up the nerve to walk over to the Buzzard building on Eastern's campus, try to find the TV station, walk in, and when I did, I walked into the front doors, which the building is quite different now than it was when I was a student here. And I walked in the front door, and I remember the secretaries were located right inside the front door. And of course they looked, and I'm not really a shy person, but I was very timid in saying, I'm looking for the TV station. I'm actually looking for Newswatch. And they're like, well, you've made it to the TV station, and if you're interested in the news department, it's straight back through these double doors. And I said, okay. So I walked back there, and I introduced myself, and I said, I don't know anything about television, but I have a television class, and I'm just interested in volunteering. And here comes this gentleman, and he came around the corner, and he said, glad to meet you. We need a camera operator tonight. So interested in working the studio camera for the newscast tonight? And I said, well, I guess so. So that night I had no experience, and I worked the television I worked the camera in the studio. And really my first year as a freshman, I worked nothing but production. I worked audio, camera. At the time, we had a teleprompter that wasn't computerized. It was on a conveyor belt, and you had to lay the scripts down on the conveyor belt. And as the belt would move, the scripts would come underneath a lens, and that lens would project down on the script and feed it to the cameras. So I did that for the first year. I also shot video, and at the time, we had to lug around this big cart, and it was 3/4 inch tape, and we had to lug around a cart and all of this camera equipment to anywhere we wanted to shoot. So my sophomore year, I migrated more into reporting, and they asked me if I would be interested in being the ag reporter, ag anchor, and I thought, I don't know a lick about farming, but I'm willing to learn and willing to try. So I spent a semester learning about the price of corn and beans and cattle and everything farming, and I did that for a semester. And then beyond that, I pretty much got my hands into everything. I did anchoring, reporting, videography, production work. I still did all of that, all the while working on some of the other productions at WEIU-TV as well. We did talk shows, sports shows, health shows, and it was a way for me to get a little bit more experience outside of news.
What were some of the things you covered on Newscan/Newswatch?
Newswatch, when I was a student back between 1988 and 92, is, much like it is today in that there were different story categories. There was news, there was breaking news, agriculture, sports, health, education. We had different segments of the newscast that were dedicated to those specific areas. Unlike today where, news is news, and you don't have really a health block or a consumer block or an international block. It's all kind of, it's all weaved together. Locally, I would say, there were some memorable stories, fires, weather-related events, crimes. There was an Eastern student that was actually killed on campus, and that was a very memorable, story. Stories where new university presidents would come in and take over. There was a big story out of Martinsville, Illinois, where they were looking to construct a nuclear waste facility, and it would be where all this nuclear material would go to Martinsville, and it would be a dump site for this nuclear waste material. And as you can imagine, the townspeople in Martinsville and surrounding communities absolutely did not want a nuclear waste facility in their backyard. So there was a lot of protesting, a lot of meetings, a lot of people that were against this big corporation coming into town. It didn't end up coming to Martinsville, but there was a lot of media and a lot of press over that story.
how often did you work on the air, like back when you were a student?
Different anchors work different nights, and that was set up so that students would have an opportunity. They didn't, just because a student wanted to be on the air didn't necessarily mean that they would get to be on air. I mean, it's just like there are a lot of athletes that want to be the quarterback, but unless they have the skills, they're not going to be tossed the ball. Same thing with news. Students that wanted to be on air had to essentially prove themselves in some other areas and prove themselves as shooters and editors and work on the radio for voice work and reporting and that sort of thing. So I would say that while I did a fair amount of work on air, I also did a fair amount of work behind the scenes. I really enjoyed producing. And producing is, you're the creator of the newscast. You work with the news director and executive producers to decide what news stories go in the newscast. And then you not only write stories yourself, but you also work with the reporters that are out in the field gathering news for you that day. And so I really enjoyed that. So I would say my time was probably split 50-50 in front of the camera and behind.
So did you have any memorable colleagues while you were there? And I mean, what was just your relationship like with I guess the chemistry between you and the other, or just in general between the members of NewsScan/Newswatch?
I had great friends back then, friends that I'm still in touch with today. These were students. I wasn't a part of a sorority, so this was NewsScan was my sorority/fraternity, and all of us students became really close. We socialized, we worked together, we fought like brothers and sisters, but that was pretty typical. But I look at some of my close classmates, and all of them are still working in news in various markets: Chicago, Indianapolis. I had a classmate that ended up working for a period of time for Al Jazeera. So they're all over. And the university had a reunion several years ago and invited former news scanners and news watchers back. It was actually a WEIU reunion, and it was really fun to see all those classmates. So, we were a pretty hardcore group of kids that knew that we wanted to do broadcasting. We knew that we wanted to do journalism at a time when it was pretty competitive. Not that it's not competitive now, but I don't know the facts and the figures and the numbers, but I would say back when I was graduating college, there were a lot more people going into the business than there are now. So jobs were competitive, and it was really rewarding to see friends and coworkers go on and succeed in journalism.
So what was it like when you kind of reached the end of your days working at WEIU, at least as a student, and also did your experience with WEIU kind of help carry you to other positions?
Yeah, but I'll be honest with you, after college, I was in my second semester senior year. I did I did an internship at a radio station, I did an internship at a TV station, and I did an internship in Washington, D.C., outside of television, more in PR. And my senior year, I really felt like I had a meltdown, oh my gosh, I've just spent 4 years majoring in journalism and working in journalism. I'm not so sure that journalism is what I want to do. I think more it was because I was scared to go out and look for jobs, not because I was scared of the work or scared of the profession. It was more, oh boy, I've got to put a resume together, and oh boy, where do I start looking for a job? It wasn't like today. I can get on my computer and with a few little clicks of the mouse and clicks of the keyboard, you have Monster and Indeed and all these other job banks at your fingertips. That wasn't the case when I was getting out of college. I remember going to my town library, I felt astray, and I walked in and I was getting these big binded books on companies, And I remember handwriting down all of their addresses and sending them letters that I was looking, handwritten letters that I was looking for a job. And it just so happened that my news director at NewsScan at the time, Susan Kaufman, she directed me to a couple of job openings. People would call her about a job opening and she would pass it along to her students. I just happened to be the recipient of one of those job notifications via Sue, and I pursued it. I was scared, but I did pursue it, and I ended up landing my first job in television because of that reference.
How long did you work at that television station and just television in general prior to coming back to EIU?
I graduated in 1992, and then I spent 10 years at a CBS affiliate in Indiana. And then from there, I've been at Eastern almost 16 years. So I spent 10 years at the CBS affiliate. I was hired in as a newsroom assistant. Essentially, it was a glorified secretarial position, but my news director, Sue Kaufman, said, take the job. And I said, but Sue, it's a secretarial job, and I don't want to be a secretary. I just spent 4 years in college to do something more. And she said, trust me, take the job. And I took the job, and about 6 months after I was at the job, I was promoted to morning anchor, and then not long after that, I was promoted to the midday anchor, and then I also produced the midday show. So patience pays off, and I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, and I firmly believe my experience that I had in college and working at a television facility that was not a student TV station, that was a professional station that afforded students the opportunity to work there, helped me to not only get my first job, but also to be promoted rather quickly.
What led you back to EIU?
It took 3 tries, actually. I was informed by, when I was a student at Eastern and at WEIU, over a 4-year time, you get to know the secretaries and the general manager and the station manager and engineers, and you keep in touch with those folks, not just for friendship, but for networking. And on 2 separate occasions, I was informed by some of my former superiors that a news director position was open at Eastern, and would it be something that I would even entertain? Well, at the time, I was in commercial television. I was just getting my feet wet. I was enjoying, a spot on the anchor desk, and I just wasn't ready. I not that I wasn't ready, I didn't want to leave my job, leave my friends. A few years had passed, and the opportunity was given to me again. I was contacted about the position, and the more I got to thinking about it, I wasn't leaving news, I was just leaving the anchor desk. And really, I thought, delivering the news is fulfilling, but if I have the chance to work with students and maybe teach them what I did for 10 years, that might be a little bit more gratifying. So I thought about it, and applied, and I was actually hired on an interim basis. The position had to be approved for a national search, and the red tape of a governmental job. So I was hired in as an interim, and I was in that position for a year or 2 before they they did the national search, and of course I ended up getting the permanent position. So it was a soul search, if I really wanted to leave commercial TV. But I've been at WEIU now for almost 16 years, and I work with several people that also came from commercial television, and what we do now is about the same as what they do at a commercial television station. I just happen to work with student journalists that have to take classes in the morning.
Do you think being a student here kind of gave you an advantage or a special perspective, like on as being the news director here? I mean, kind of knowing how the school works and just kind of the brand and everything.
Obviously, I'm a bit partial because I currently work at WEIU, and I'm a huge cheerleader for WEIU, but I firmly believe that my experiences as a student at a university that offers a broadcast program and allows students to work in a multi-million-dollar television facility most definitely gave me a leg up. I did an internship up in Champaign, Illinois, and I interned at WEIU-TV Television, which was an NBC affiliate. And I remember I was actually selected to be an intern alongside of a University of Illinois student. And I was very intimidated by that because I thought, oh, this person is going to be just so much smarter than me and know so much more than me and get to do so much more than me. Quite the contrary. That student may have been book smarter than me, but I had all the experience of working in an operating television newsroom at Eastern Illinois University. And once the news director at WEIU-TV realized that and realized that I had a clue and knew what a camera was and could write a package and shoot video and put a story together under strict guidelines, very, very quickly I was allowed to go out in the field. And I was going out with paid photographers, which I think in the beginning they were a little miffed by, that they had to be sent out with the intern. But I think they quickly learned that I had a clue and that I knew what I was doing, and they enjoyed going out with me. They could show me and they could teach me, and they knew that I was willing to learn. All the while, the intern from the University of Illinois had to stay in the newsroom most of the time because she didn't know as much as I did, coming from a school that provided such a great experience.
What were your early years at the news station? I mean, being the director of WEIU like?
Well, it was hard, especially the first couple of years, because I sort of came in into a beehive because the station had lost their news director. They were in the process of finding a new one, and the person before me was a graduate assistant who was really only doing the job part-time. And the students that were seasoned students that had been here a couple of years were set in their ways. They were set in the policies that they had been used to, and procedures and selection processes and that sort of thing. So, and scheduling, more procedural things. And so I come in and I start to change some things, the way that things are done. I change a schedule. I make a schedule to where it's, the same people so many days a week, different anchors, that sort of thing. And it was quite the change that students were not used to. And I think students were promised and guaranteed positions under previous management, and then I come in and I'm not upholding what previous management had promised students, and so their feathers were ruffled. So there were some growing pains and some learning curves and learning pains, but once those first few years kind of went through and people started to understand my teaching style and that I ran a tight ship because there was a lot of responsibility in putting together a newscast, the climate started to change in a positive way.
Who were some of your more memorable kind of people who worked under you, and also how did your relationship kind of with students evolve over the years?
Boy, memorable students. I've just worked with so many, and I still keep in touch. when I first started in college, we didn't have cell phones. So now we have cell phones, and I get Snapchats from them, and I get, they're out on a story and they Snapchat me. There are students all over the country, not just in newsrooms, but there are students that, worked in Hollywood, in LA for Dr. Phil, The Price is Right, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, Shark Tank, WEIU-TV, and then, countless students that have worked in newsrooms all across the country, from small, medium to large market stations. We have students in public relations. To pinpoint just one wouldn't be fair, because they've all been successful in their own right and have gone on to do great things. Friends that I've worked with, when I was a student, they're producers at television stations, as I mentioned, in Chicago. They're news anchors in large markets. They're production assistants at the WGNs of the world. So, success isn't necessarily based on market size or television size or what newsroom you're in or what newsroom you're not. I think success is based on happiness. Some may ask me, why did I stay in Indiana for 10 years? Well, because I was happy. I had good friends. I enjoyed the community that I lived in, and I had fun at my job. Did I make a lot of money? No, but I was happy in other areas. So I don't have a memorable person. There are so many. And as far as relationships with students, that you have to walk a fine line, because, my job is to be a mentor and to teach and to praise when it's necessary and to reprimand when it's required. And so you have to walk a fine line to make sure that you're staying professional with students. And it's not that you can't become their friends, but you have to be their mentor. You do a lot of mentoring, you do a lot of mothering, you do a lot of counseling, and you do a lot of correcting. But that's what makes the job great.
Well, as a news director, what are some of the more interesting stories you/your students have covered?
Probably the two most memorable, I would say, would be when Blair Hall on Eastern Illinois University's campus caught fire. It was a major fire, major situation that impacted not just the campus community, but Charleston and surrounding communities. And that was a story that was followed for several years, just in the building's restoration and how the campus was restructuring classes and locations and the building process. And so that was an ongoing story. And then several years ago in the summer, I was sitting in the newsroom in probably the early afternoon, and we listened to police scanners all day long. And it was myself and one reporter, only two people in the newsroom. And the scanners started erupting with information on a bank robbery that happened in Arcola. And I looked at the student journalist that was in the newsroom, and I said, "Did you hear what I just heard?" And he said, "I think so." And so the way that the story evolved, there were these two gentlemen, and they went into a bank. They took hostages, including the bank manager. They left the bank, and also within this crime spree, there was a home invasion that happened within the area, a subsequent police chase involving sheriff's deputies, an exchange of gunfire, and a Douglas County Sheriff's deputy ended up being shot and killed. And so that was a major, major story. And I believe that day, most of our newscast was dedicated to that story. We even had the sports anchor. He was sent out to go cover stories on the situation. We talked to the bank manager that was held hostage. We even called the bank at the time on a whim, and the hostage taker actually answered the phone, and we spoke to him. So very memorable story, and a massive learning experience for those students that were involved in it.
Ever had to deal with any challenges or like ethical issues or anything like that?
As far as challenges, part of the job is to teach students, and when students falter, whether it's showing up late, not showing up, not performing to the level in which they need to perform, or those are hard conversations to have with students, and sometimes the action warrants them to be released from the team, which is never easy. Ethical issues, I wouldn't say it's a daily issue, but a lot of times student journalists will pitch a story and it may be with somebody that they know. There's a teacher shortage, and a student will say, oh, well, I'm, one of my sorority sisters is an education major. We could talk to her. Well, there is a little bit of an ethical issue there, because the reporter knows the newsmaker. And so, in those types of situations, while that newsmaker might be good to talk to, that reporter might not be the best reporter to interview them, or maybe the reporter goes but is not the one to ask the questions. So it can be something as small as that. Recreating news is an ethical issue. If, let's say, you go to an event, there might be canine trials, and officers are there running dogs, and you just so happen to show up right when the trials are over, and we missed all the good video. And the officer says, oh, no worries, I can run the dog again and you can get your video. Technically, that's recreating news. We weren't there when the news originally happened. So those are some things. Let's say water bills are going up in Charleston and you need video of running water in a sink. And the photographer says, oh, we can run by my apartment and I can turn on the faucet and we can get video of it. Is that ethical or not ethical? So those types of things we do deal with on a fairly regular basis.
What would you say currently the relationship kind of between your students, WEIU-TV, have with the more radio/print students?
A lot of our students do both. So there may be a student, for instance, our sports anchor is also the sports writer for the Daily Eastern News. We have a news anchor that's also the radio host for a Monday radio program at HitMix. So a lot of our students are cross-platform. So we have a good relationship with those newsrooms. I've given stories to the Daily Eastern News. The Daily Eastern News has given us stories. They've given us photos. They've given us tips. We work really closely with radio. They take a lot of our news stories and broadcast them on their radio shows. So I think we have a good working relationship. Could it be stronger? Probably. I think in the daily grind of doing what we do, we sometimes forget, oh, let's go work with the Daily Eastern News on this, or let's go, work with radio on this. I think it's just because we just get so robotic and programmed to just focus on our medium. But I think there's a good working relationship with the other medias on campus.
What does the community think of News Watch and WEIU-TV?
We do not subscribe to Nielsen ratings, which is how television stations in the country are rated. And so it's hard to gauge how many people are watching and who's watching, because we don't subscribe to that. That said, we know people are watching because they call us and they want more information on stories we've run. They want copies of our newscast, or they notice the student reporters out in the field. Hey, I saw you doing the weather tonight, or hey, I saw your story on the training out at Lake Charleston and I thought you did a really nice job. So we also, outside of news, we do a lot of community engagement programs. We have This Is Our Story series that has been extremely successful. And when we air those programs, we get callers from Springfield, Champaign, Rantoul, Effingham, Paris, Marshall, Decatur, and everywhere in between. So that's a very good gauge of people that are watching all over the viewing area.
Since you've been here, what kind of accolades or awards has like WEIU received? Have they gotten like feedback from like, they have like any of the newscasts been like around the par of say, you know, even a commercial newscast locally or nationally, or even, or how does it even compare to like how would you compare WEIU's Newswatch to like newscasts run by other public television stations, more specifically even kind of other public television station newscasts done by students?
There aren't a lot of PBS stations that do news, and the only one that I am familiar with is WSIU in Carbondale, and I would say that our newscast is very comparable. We've won numerous state, regional, and national awards for our newscast. Do we win every year? No. But we've got a wall full of plaques and a wall full of trophies in the years that I've been at WEIU and beyond, on competitions hosted by the Illinois Broadcasters Association, the Illinois News Broadcasters Association, the Broadcast Education Association, the Society for Collegiate Journalists, and the list goes on. And I've got a stack of awards that I could share with you. We've been awarded for the last several years, I believe, and don't quote me on this, but it's close to a dozen times that we've been honored for either our newscast or individual work by the Mid-America Emmys. They do a student competition, and we've been, awarded for our newscast and also for our individual work for the last several years. We go up against schools like the U of I, Southern, Illinois, Illinois State, Northern, Northwestern, you name it, any, public university, community college in the state. We have been up in competitions with statewide, and then the list is endless for regional awards and national awards. So we have a large trophy cabinet.
Since it's a newscast run by college students, how do you handle kind of the constant turnover of students? I mean, since you only have 4 years in college at most, usually sometimes 5 or 6.
That is probably the toughest part of my job, because every December and every May we lose good students, and it is extremely difficult because, like this last May, we lost 9 students, and those are 9 students that know how to do a variety of jobs, and so it's a lot of recruiting, it's a lot of training to get new students up and running and supporting the newscast. So it's probably, between doing a schedule and losing students in December and May, it's probably the one area of my job that's a struggle for me, because I hate to lose students. Obviously, it's always tough to lose the kids that have given you their heart and soul for the last 3-4 years, but it's also wonderful to see them move on and grow. But it's just part of the job. It's just part of the way that this, being in a newscast that's on a college campus, that going into it, that you're not getting students forever. You're getting them for at most 4 years.
How good is the station / Newswatch at kind of like bringing in like new recruits, either kids who are still in high school that maybe are still looking to go to college, or even just students on campus who never knew they wanted to get into broadcast or didn't know this was around?
Well, Eastern Illinois University does the recruiting. They go out to schools and community colleges and high schools throughout the state and the region recruiting, promoting our program. We also go to several open house events that are on campus to talk to prospective students that might be interested in journalism. I will also, if students reach out to me wanting to get information about our program, I meet with them. I respond back to them with information on the program. So WEIU individually, while we do a lot of recruiting with tours and conversing with prospective students, the university does the bulk of our recruiting by, filtering students that have an interest in broadcast journalism, and then they send those students to us. We've also been able to get a fair amount of students over the years from students that have gone through the program. If you go through the program and then you encounter some high school student that's interested in journalism or broadcasting, you're going to say, hey, check out Eastern Illinois University. It's a great program. I went through Eastern. This is what I was able to do. So that has also been very valuable.
How has like Newswatch / NewsScan and even just WEIU-TV in general changed, like both when you were a student to when you were an instructor, and also just kind of how has it changed in general over like about a 30-year or so period?
Probably the biggest change is technology. As I mentioned early in this interview, when I started in journalism, we were recording on cameras that weighed about 10 times more than the camera you're shooting with. And you're also shooting on a little memory card that's the size of a postage stamp. And when I was in journalism, we shot on a 3/4 inch tape that also weighed a couple of pounds, and it was big and bulky. So I think technology has changed dramatically in 20 years. Journalism hasn't changed as far as what we do here. Now, it's changed on social media, changed with the evolution of Facebook and Twitter and other social media. But the true foundation of journalism, telling good stories, telling the who, what, when, where, why, and how, has not changed. Journalists set out to get answers, to have questions answered, to get the facts, to get the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And that's never going to change. Buildings have changed, carpet has changed, sets have changed, cameras have changed, but the foundation of storytelling still holds true.
What are some of the more interesting things that have happened behind the scenes as, well, both when you were a student and a news director?
The antics of the kids, that's a daily thing. The laughter, the hurt, I'll never forget one time we were in a break. We don't run commercials on PBS, but we were in a break, a public service announcement probably. And the camera's shooting to the desk, and it's about time for sports. And there's no talent at the desk. And I start to sweat, and my heart starts to beat, and I'm looking at the countdown clock for the PSA, and it was less than a minute. No sports anchor. And at the time, the way that our news operation is set up now, the newsroom was right across the hall from the control room. And I remember running into the control room, and the sports anchor was sitting at the desk, still typing. And I said, "You're on in about 15 seconds. You need to get down to the studio now." And I go back into the control room, and all you can hear is, running down the hallway and doors flying open. And the sports anchor barely got to the desk, and when he was at the desk, he was out of breath to start his sports report. He was totally engrossed in what he was doing, and he was crunched for time, and he was finishing writing his stories and was completely oblivious to the fact that sports was on in less than a minute. There's so many other stories like that, but that's really one that comes to mind, is the sports anchor nearly forgot to sports anchor.
What exactly does the university think of the TV station and Newswatch?
I can only give you, the support that we've had from the university, but as far as how they feel about WEIU, I wouldn't be the best person to answer about that. But the university has been extremely supportive of our program. The journalism department, the communication studies department have both been, supportive of our students, of our mission, of getting students involved in what we do here. The journalism department is so gracious in providing us with talented student awards and other financial awards to students that spend time at WEIU, so I would say that the relationship is very strong, and I believe that the university believes in our mission, believes in our students, and loves to see our students thrive, graduate, and go on and do great things.
Does WEIU kind of help bring in more funding to the station, do you think?
At WEIU, we are supported by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the state, the university provides a lot to WEIU, but we also have members that support us by making their pledge of support for our programming and for our mission and for our students. And without all of that, it would be very hard to survive. So we have cultivated, not myself, but we do have a membership manager that has cultivated several hundred new members to WEIU that believe in what we do and understand that without their help and support, we would be unable to program and provide quality programming to viewers, because programming is not free. You have to purchase it. We only get so much programming from PBS, and the programming that we do get from PBS is very costly. And so when you factor the cost to get PBS programs with all the other programs that we have to purchase, we do rely on our members and other members of the public to be members to help keep our station operating.
What do you think the future holds for Newswatch and WEIU?
Oh, I think it's great. I mean, I look to have more students participate in Newswatch. I look to us to continue producing award-winning newscasts that will be viewed all over the state. I look for our students to continue to thrive in our program and go on and do great things with their professional careers.
How would you say WEIU and Newswatch, are they ever at a disadvantage with, like the other stations that are reachable, or, they kind of just go to the beat of their own drum, or?
I think for the mere fact that we're not a commercial affiliate, that our programming is different. And like I said, because we're not rated by Nielsen, we just don't have a very clear idea of how many people are watching. But if you were to ask me, does a person watch commercial television more than PBS? Yes. I think that's just history has proven that. I think it's just the nature of the way that television has evolved.
Well, what do you do, when Newswatch, isn't on the air, over the summer, any breaks like that?
I work with the production staff, so all summer long, I also produce a show that we air here at WEIU that's driven towards animals. So I work to set up guests, I host that show, I do some writing for that show. I also host pledge events that the station has, and then I work with the other two producers on staff and assist them on their television shows that they produce. So I actually get to step aside from my news duties and actually do other production duties during the summer, which is really kind of exciting. For instance, last night I was able to host a pledge event on a musical program that we were airing, and while I'm used to news, it was very fun to be in front of the camera again to encourage people to watch and to become members of WEIU.
Have you ever given or received any good advice, regarding journalism or broadcasting in general?
I always tell students to kill them with kindness. And, students will call somebody on a controversial story and very quickly they'll get someone that's not very kind on the other end of the phone, and it's very easy to either clam up and hang up, or it's very easy to be gruff back to that person if they're gruff to you. But kill them with kindness. Be nice. It's a lot easier to be nice than to be mean, and it will get you farther in life, and it will help you on stories too, not just for the story at hand, but to cultivate potential other newsmakers that could help you down the road.
Is there anything else you would like to say about WEIU or Newswatch or anything like that?
Well, I mean, this could be my opportunity, depending on who's watching this, is to encourage others, young students that might be thinking about college, thinking about broadcasting, to pay a visit to Eastern and pay a visit to the Buzzard Building and come by WEIU and check out our facilities, because, again, it's a multi-million-dollar facility that is for the community and for students. And we want to be able to show it off, but we also want to be able to have students take advantage of the great opportunities here.